Good morning. Is Call of Cthulhu safe for stream though? I have no idea. If it's not, we'll change it. Simple as that. But thank you for the concern though. Yeah, that is really cute though. You're not allowed to move. Not when the cat's on you. True. But it's also my first time reading it though. And we're also starting with Dagon. If it ends up being too much, I'll make the call. I'm doing fine, McAwful. How are you? Good. That's good. I'm glad to hear. Glad to hear. Haha. Oh, but German shepherds are so cute. Like huge, gentle giants. I feel like, at least most of my experience anyway. I gotta ask, are you a morning person? Not by choice. Not by choice. Believe me, not by choice. Aww. Flinging me every chance she gets. Oh, I see. I am by hostage this. Oh, because you're a cat? Oh. Suplex that dog? Can I pet that dog? Good morning, Sush. Y'all are cute. Uh oh, they will not suplex that dog. Y'all are cute. Okay. But I did not know that though, McAwful. I appreciate the concern about the Call of Cthulhu. We'll see if it does get to be too much. I'll probably change to something else. I have all of H.P. Lovecraft's writings, and we'll see how it goes. Morning, Harry. How are you? Sorry. True. You know, you're probably right. Not bad, thanks. That's good. That's good. Self, not too bad. Not too bad. And careful, Pookie. My head mod you're talking to. They're a bear of they are a bear of many talents. I fucking love it. Is it really? Hold on. I want to double check to make sure I have that. Give me 1 second. Is it? I remember. I remember coming across that story at some point. What was it? I do have that. Okay, cool. All right, I'll write that down. Maybe if the Call of Cthulhu ends up being too much, I'll go to that one. Lap seat for this cat. I mean, if a cat fits, it sits. Just cat things. Alrighty. Let's get into it. Kind of want to This is the first time I've ever read anything in this part, so I mean, if it's modern print, I wouldn't be surprised if they edited it to be a bit less xenophobic. That's fair. Okay. I mean, we'll find out pretty quickly, I presume. Either way. All right. So for anybody who's just joining in, ooh, thank you for the alert, Pookie. We are currently reading one of the classic tales from H.P. Lovecraft. We're starting with Dagon, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, and then we may be moving forward with the Call of Cthulhu. Do you have any recommendations on which ones to read next? Please let me know. Dagon. Is it really? Good to know. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Dagon. Oh, that's okay. If anything, McAuliffe, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. This is my first time reading it. I've heard of it countless times, but I've never read it, so we'll see. Okay. I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more. Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below. Do not think from my slavery to morphine that I am a weakling or degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death. Ooh, really? Okay. So, how I go about which one I read is I usually put like a poll or something in the suggestion area of my Discord, and from there, people are always welcome to give suggestions. Boot, hello, good morning. Hopefully, you got some sleep last night. Hmm. Okay. It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider. That's good to hear, Boot. It's really good to hear. The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their latter degradation, so that our vessel was made a legitimate prize. Whilst we were, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners, so liberal indeed was the discipline of our captors, that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land. But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous. When at last I awaked, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished, for there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to to the very core. The region was putrid, with the carcasses of decaying fish, and of other less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud in the unending plain. I apologize. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity. There was nothing within hearing and nothing in sight save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. Thank you, Boot. I appreciate it. Thank you. 2 months in a row. Let's go. Oh, but I really do appreciate it. Thank you. Gosh, that is actually really sweet of you. Thank you. Okay. Mm. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet. As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that only one theory could explain my position. Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing the regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, strain my ears as I might, nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things. For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its thickness, and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for traveling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished sea and possible rescue. On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal. All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert. That night I encamped, and on the following day still traveled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it. By the fourth evening I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance, an intervening valley setting out into a sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to sleep no more. Such visions as I experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence. Close enough. I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me, but I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an unmeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illuminate. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into the fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious remnants of paradise lost. In the Satan's hideous climb, the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite as perpendicular as I had imagined. The ledges and outcroppings of rock afforded fairly easily footholds for a descent. Whilst after a drop of a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me, an object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon. That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself, but I was conscious of this distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature. A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express, for despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith whose massive bulk had known the workmanship, perhaps the workmanship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight, I examined my surroundings more closely. The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that heaved in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions, and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me, and unlike anything I had ever seen in books, consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things, which are unknown to the modern world, but whose decomposing forms I had observed in the ocean-risen plain. I think I might take a drink of water. Okay. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible across the intervening water on account of their enormous size were an array of bas reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Dor. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer, they were damnably human in general outline despite webbed hands and feet. Shocking wide and flabby lips, glassy bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seemed to have chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background, for one of the creatures was Shun in the act of killing whale represented as but a little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltown concept of the most daring back up. I apologize. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born. Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into the past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist, I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then suddenly I saw it, with only the slight churning to mark its rise to the surface. The, the thing slid into view above the dark waters, vast, Polymephus-like, and loathsome. It darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent up the slope and cliff, of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remembered little. I believe I sang a great deal, and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing. I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat. At any rate, I know I heard peals of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods. When I came out the windows, I was in a San Francisco hospital, brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe. Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and mused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god, but soon perceiving that he was hopelessly conventional, I did not press my inquiries. It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug given only transient decrease, and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information of, or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men. Often I ask myself if it could not have all been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likeness on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows, to drag down in their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean floor shall ascend amid universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as some of the immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand, the window, the window. And that was Dagon. That was really quick. Yeah, somebody mentioned it being a short story. That's interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about it. It almost seems like it's too short, like it was cut off or something. Mm. Well, thank you, McAwful. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Mhm. I'm just gonna a small break, chat with you guys, and then we'll get into it. I am gonna try the Call of Cthulhu though. I've heard I've heard mixed things on it. I've heard revised version is better. Now, I think what I have is the revised version, but I could be wrong. And if the case I am wrong, as I've stated before, I will certainly change stories. COC is pretty short too. Most of his stories are pretty short, to be fair. Ooh, perfect. Okay. I mean, I could always just go from start to finish, but I feel like there's some that are connected. So you said Dagon and Shadow over Innsmouth. It was a good pairing, right? Do you think I should resort to that one because they're connected by the same god? Sort of connected. Okay. If it's just sort of connected, then I think I will can't say without not without spoiling. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. That's actually one of the rules. So by all means, I really do appreciate that. If that's the case, then I think I'll keep with Call of Cthulhu and go from there. We'll see. Okay. What do I think? Okay. The Call of Cthulhu, found among the papers of the late Francis Wayland Thurston of Boston. Of such great powers or beings, there may be conceivably a survival of a hugely remote period when consciousness was manifested, perhaps in shapes and forms long since withdrawn before the tide of advancing humanity, forms of which poetry and legend alone have caught a flying memory and call them gods, monsters, mythical beings of all sorts and kinds. Algernon Blackwood. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all of its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that word. But someday, the piercing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. Oh, okay, this should be interesting. Not sure I agree with this, but to each their own. Theosophists have guessed at the awesome grandeur of the cosmic cycle wherein our world and human race form transient incidents. They have hinted at strange survivals in terms which would freeze the blood if not masked by a bland optimism. But it is not from them that there came the single glimpse of forbidden aeons, which chills me when I think of it and maddens me when I dream of it. That glimpse, like all dread glimpses of truth, flashed out from an accidental piecing together of separated things. In this case, an old newspaper item and the notes of a dead professor. I hope that no one else will accomplish this piecing out. Certainly, if I live, I shall never knowingly supply a link in a so hideous a chain. I think the professor, too, intended to keep silent regarding the part he knew, and that he would have destroyed his notes had not sudden death seized him. My knowledge of the thing began in the winter of 1926 to 27, with the death of my grand uncle, George Gamel Angel, professor emeritus of Semitic languages in Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. Professor Angel was widely known as an authority on ancient transcriptions and had frequently been resorted to by the heads of prominent museums, so that his passing at the age of 92 may be recalled by many. Locally, interest was intensified by the obscurity of the cause of death. The professor had been stricken whilst returning from the Newport boat, falling suddenly, as witness said, after having been jostled by a nautical-looking, not gonna say that word, who had come from one of the queer dark courts on the precipitous hillside, which formed a shortcut from the waterfront of the deceased's home in William Street. Physicians were unable to find any visible disorder, but concluded, after perplexed debate, that some obscure lesion of the heart, induced by the brisk ascent of so steep a hill by so elderly a man, was responsible for the end. At this time I saw no reason to dissent from this dictum. Latterly I am inclined to wonder, and more than wonder, as my granduncle's heir and executioner, for he died a childless widower. I was expected to go over his papers with some thoroughness, and for that purpose move his entire set of files and boxes to my quarters in Boston. Much of the material which I correlated will be later published by the American Archaeological Society. But there was one box which I found exceedingly puzzling, which I felt much adverse for shewing to other eyes. It had been locked, and I did not find the key till it occurred to me to examine the personal ring, which the professor always carried in his pocket. Then, indeed, I succeeded in opening it, but when I did so, seemed only to be confronted by a greater and more closely locked barrier. For what could be meaning of the queer clay bas relief and the disjointed jottings, ramblings, and cuttings from which I found? Had my uncle, in his later years, become credulous of the most superficial impostures? I resolved to search out the eccentric sculptor responsible for this apparent disturbance of an old man's peace of mind. Bas relief was a rough rectangle less than an inch thick and about 5 by 6 inches in the area, obviously of modern origin. Its designs, however, were far from modern in atmosphere and suggestion. For although the vagaries of cubism and futurism are many and wild, they do not often produce the cryptic regularity which lurks in prehistoric writing. In writing of some kind, the bulk of these designs seemed certainly to be, though my memory, despite much familiarity with the papers and collections of my uncle, failed in any way to identify this particular species, or even to hint at its remotest affiliations. Above these apparent hieroglyphics was a figure of evidently pictorial intent, though its impressionistic execution forbade a very clear idea of its nature. It seemed to be a sort of monster, or a symbol resembling a monster, of a form which only diseased fancy could conceive. If I say that my somewhat extravagant imagination yields simultaneous pictures of an octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature, I shall often be unfaithful to the spirit of the thing. A pulpy, tentacled head surmounted a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings, but it was the general outline of the whole which made it most shockingly frightful. Behind the figure was a vague suggestion of a cyclopean architectural background. The writing accompanying this oddity was, aside from a stack of press cuttings in Professor Engel's most recent hand, it made no pretense to literary style. What seemed to be the main document was headed Cthulhu Cult, in characters painstakingly printed to avoid the erroneous reading of a word so unheard of. The manuscript was divided into 2 sections, the first of which headed 1925, Dream and Dream work of H.A. Wilcox, 7 Thomas Street, Providence, Rhode Island, and the second, Narrative of Inspector John R. Legrassi, 121 Beanville Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, at 1908, AAMS MTG. I'm not sure what that means, but I apologize for that. On notes on the same and Prof. Webb's account, I think. I'm not sure about that. The other manuscript papers were all brief notes, and some of them accounts of the queer dreams of different persons, some of them citations from the theosophical books and magazines, notably W. Scott Eliot's Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria, and the rest comments on long surviving secret societies and hidden cults. with references to passages in such mythological and anthropological source books as Fraser's Golden Bow and Miss Mary's A Witch Cult in Western Europe. The cuttings largely alluded to outre, the mental illnesses and outbreaks of group folly or mania in the spring of 1925. Okay, I can see, McAwful, if you're still in here, I can see why there's definite concern for this. I'm not too sure about continuing this, but does this sound like the old version to you? Okay. I'm getting like subtle hints of different phobias and not so great word usage in here. So I'm not sure. No, it rains 1928. So close. The morning doom. You're good. You're good. Sorry, on phone. No worries. No worries. Welcome on in. Welcome on in. I'll keep an eye on it as we go, especially if like they seem to mention things by name. Worst case scenario is I will skip saying those words, and that should be okay. I think it's more so the word usage that Twitch worries about. Wouldn't you say? I mean, you've read this, so you know kind of what to expect. Yeah, you're right about that. Okay, so I'll keep an eye out for different words that are on here as I'm going through it. But for right now, I've really only come across that once. Hold on, I'm just not going to say the word. We'll see how long I can go for this. Thankfully, it's a short story. Alrighty. The first half of the principal manuscript told a peculiar tale. It appeared that on March 1st, 1925, a dark young man of neurotic and excited aspect had called upon Professor Angell bearing the singular clay bas relief, which was then exceedingly damp and fresh. His card bore the name of Henry Anthony Wilcox, and my uncle had recognized him as the youngest son of an excellent family slightly known to him, who had latterly been studying sculpture at the Rhode Island School of Design and living alone at the Fleur de Lis building near that institution. Wilcox was a precious youth of known genius but great eccentricity, and from a childhood excited attention through the strange stories and odd dreams he was in the habit of relating. Called himself psychically hypersensitive, and the staid folk of the ancient commercial city dismissed him as merely blank. Never mingling with such his kind, he had dropped gradually from social visibility and was now known to a small group of aesthetes from other towns. Even the Providence Art Club, anxious to preserve its conservatism, had found him quite hopeless. On the occasion of the visit, ran the professor's manuscript. The sculptor abruptly asked for the benefit of his host's archaeological knowledge in identifying the hieroglyphics on the bas relief. He spoke in a dreamy, stilted manner, which suggested pose and an alienated sympathy, and my uncle shewn some sharpness in replying. For the conspicuous freshness of the tablet implied kinship with anything but archaeology. Young Wilcox's rejoinder, which impressed my uncle enough to make him recall and record it verbatim, was a frantically poetic cast which must have typified his whole conversation. Typified his whole conversation, which I have since found highly characteristic of him. He said, "It is new indeed, for I made it last night in a dream of strange cities, and dreams are older than brooding Tyre, of the contemplative Sphinx, or a garden girdled Babylon. Oh, I think I'm getting where this is going. Okay, take this slow. I don't agree with this, but you know what? Some stories I have found tend to be, how do I word this? If a story or something from the arts, whether it's paintings or music, if it makes you feel anything, it's done its job. Whether it's a good or bad feeling, it's still done its job. At this point, I'm just being Twitch safe, so we will keep going. I am curious about it though, because I've never read it before. Right. It was then that he began the rambling tale which suddenly played upon a sleeping memory and won the fevered interest of my uncle. There had been a slight earthquake tremor that night before, and the most considerable felt in New England for some years. And Wilcox's imagination had been keenly affected. Upon retiring, he had unprecedented dream of great cyclopean cities of Titan blocks and sky-flung monoliths, all dripping with green ooze and sinister with latent horror. Hieroglyphics had covered the walls and pillars, and from some undetermined point below had come a voice that was not a voice, a chaotic sensation which only fancy could transmute into sound, but which he attempted to render by the almost unpronounceable jumble of letters. Cthulhu action? This verbal jumble was the key to the recollection, which excited and disturbed Professor Angle. He questioned the sculptor with scientific minuteness and studied with almost frantic intensity the bas relief on which the youth had found himself working, chilled and clad only in his night clothes, when waking had stolen bewilderingly over him. My uncle blamed his old age, Wilcox said afterward, for his slowness in recognizing both hieroglyphics and pictorial design. Many of his questions seemed highly out of place to his visitor, especially those which tried to connect the latter with strange cults or societies, and Wilcox could not understand the repeated promises of silence which he was offered in exchange for admission of membership in some widespread mystical or paganly religious body. Okay. Treading lightly. When Professor Angel became conceived that the sculptor was indeed ignorant of any cult or system of cryptic lore, he besieged his visitor with demands for future reports of dreams. This bore regular fruit, for after the first interview, the manuscript records daily calls of the young man, during which he related startling fragments of nocturnal imagery whose burden was always some terrible cyclopean vista of dark and dripping stone, with the subterranean's voice or intelligence shouting monotonously in the enigmatical sense impacts and uninscribable. Oh my gosh, uninscribable save as gibberish. The two sounds most frequently repeated are those rendered by the letters Cthulhu and Riley. On March 23rd, the manuscript continued. Wilcox failed to appear, and his inquiries at his quarters revealed that he had been stricken with an obscure sort of fever and taken to the home of his family in Waterman Street. He cried out in the night, arousing several other artists in the building, and had manifested since then only alterations of unconsciousness and delirium. My uncle at once telephoned the family, my bad, and from the time forward kept close watch of the case, calling often at the Thayer Street office of Dr. Tobey, whom he learned to be in charge. Shh. I see you, McAwful. Kept close to the case, calling often at the Thayer Street office of Dr. Tobey, for whom he learned to be in charge. The youth's febrile mind, I think, was dwelling on strange things, and the doctor shuddered now and then as he spoke of them. They included not only a repetition of what he had formerly dreamed, but touched wildly on a gigantic thing miles high, which walked and lumbered about. He had no time fully to describe this object, but occasionally frantic words, as repeated by Dr. Tobey, convinced the professor that it must be identical with the nameless monstrosity. Thank you for the hydrate. Okay. Keep going, I suppose. Convinced the professor that it must be identical with the nameless monstrosity he had sought to depict in his dream sculpture. Reference to this object, the doctor added, was invariably a prelude to the young man's subsidence into lethargy. His temperature, oddly enough, was not greatly above normal, but his whole condition was otherwise such as to suggest true fever rather than mental disorder. On April 2nd, at about 3 p.m., every trace of Wilcox's malady suddenly ceased. He sat upright in bed, astonished to find himself at home, and completely ignorant of what had happened in dream or reality since the night of March 22nd. Pronounced well by his physician, he returned to his quarters in 3 days, but to Professor Angell he was of no further assistance. All traces of strange dreaming had vanished with his recovery, and my uncle kept no record of his night thoughts after a week of pointless and irrelevant accounts of thoroughly usual visions. Here the first part of the manuscript ended, but references to certain of the scattered notes gave me much material for thought. So much, in fact, that only the ingrained skepticism then forming my philosophy can account for my continued distrust of the artist. The notes in question were those descriptive of the dreams of various persons covering the same period as that in which young Wilcox had had his strange visitations. My uncle, it seems, had quickly instituted a prodigiously far-flung body of inquiries amongst nearly all the friends whom he could question without impertinence, asking for nightly reports of their dreams and the dates of any notable visions for some time past. The reception of his request seems to have been varied, but he must at the very least have received more responses than any ordinary man could have handled without a secretary. The original correspondence was not yet preserved, but his notes formed a thorough and really significant digest. Average people in society and business, New England's traditional salt of the earth, gave an almost complete negative result. Those scattered cases of uneasy but formless nocturnal impressions appear here and there, always between March 23rd and April 2nd, a period of young Wilcox's delirium. Scientific men were more affected, though 4 cases of vague description suggest fugitive glimpse of strange landscapes, and in one case there is mentioned a dread of something abnormal. It was from the artists and poets of the pertinent answers came, and I know that panic would have broken loose had they been able to compare notes. As it was, lacking their original letters, I half suspected the compiler of having asked leading questions, or of having edited the correspondence in corroboration of what had latently resolved to see. That is why I continue to feel that Wilcox, somehow cognizant of the old data which my uncle had possessed, had been imposing on the veteran scientist. These responses from aesthetics told a disturbing tale. From February 28th to April 2nd, a large proportion of them had dreamed very bizarre things, and the intensity of dreams being immeasurably the stronger during the period of the sculptor's delirium. Over a fourth of those who reported anything reported scenes and half sounds not unlike those which Wilcox had described, and some of the dreamers confessed acute fear of the gigantic nameless thing visible towards the last. One case, which the note describes with emphasis, was very sad. The subject, a widely known architect with leanings towards theosophy and occultism, went violently insane on the date of young Wilcox's seizure, and expired several months later after incessant screamings to be saved from the escaped denizen of hell. Had my uncle referred to these cases by name instead of merely by a number, I should have attempted some cooperation and personal investigation. But as it was, I succeeded in tracing down only some cooperation and personal investigation. Oh, I'm repeating that. I apologize. Sometimes it's kind of hard to read with this tablet. I've often wondered if all the objects of the professor's questioning felt as puzzled as did this fraction. It is well that no explanation shall ever reach them. The pressed cuttings, as I have been intimidated, touched on cases of panic, mania, and eccentricity during the given period. Professor Engel must have employed a cutting bureau, for the number of extracts was tremendous and the sources scattered throughout the globe. Here was a nocturnal suicide in London, where a lone sleeper had leaped from a window after a shocking cry. Here, likewise, a rambling letter to the editor of a paper in South America, where a fanatic deduces a dire future from the visions he has seen. A dispatch from California describes the Theosophist colony as donning white robes en masse for some glorious fulfillment, which never arrives, whilst items from India speak guardedly of serious native unrest towards the end of March. Voodoo blank multiply in Haiti, and African outposts report ominous mutterings. American officers in the Philippines find certain tribes bothersome about this time, and New York policemen are mobbed by hysterical Levantines on the night of March 22nd through 23rd. The west of Ireland, too, is full of wild rumor and legendary, and a fantastic painter named Ardois Bonneau hangs a blasphemous dream landscape in the Paris Spring Salon of 1926. And so numerous are the recorded troubles in insane asylums that only a miracle can have stopped the medical fraternity from noting strange parallelisms and drawing mystified conclusions. A weird bunch of cuttings, all told, and I can at this date scarcely envisage the callous rationalism with which I set them aside. But I was then convinced that young Wilcox had known the older matters mentioned by the professor. Boy. Well, that was interesting.
Bruh.
Alrighty, let's see. Seems like the Call of Cthulhu is a bit more involved than I was anticipating. Now it goes into number 2, Tale of the Inspector Legrasse? Legrasse? Does it sound about right?
Bruh.
Bruh. What you doing there, Pookie? This is comfy. Y'all are crazy. Okay. Strikingly working on my car, not going well. Just please be safe, Pookie. Please. Don't make me beg. I'll do it. I'm safe. Good. That's what I wanted to hear. Alrighty. I suppose we should keep going? Oh, I see. Actually, give me 1 minute. I want to see if this is the right one. It is. Okay, it's still the right one. Alrighty. Tale of Inspector Legrasse. Legrasse? Legrasse? Legrasse. I'm not sure, actually. Okay. The old matters which had made the sculptor's dream and bas relief so significant to my uncle formed the subject of the second half of his long manuscript. Once before, it appears, Professor Angell has seen the hellish outlines of the nameless monstrosity, puzzled over the unknown hieroglyphics, and heard the ominous syllables. I think it's DeGrasse. I'm not sure. Probably. Oh, is he? Oh, Pookie, that sounds like fun. Please have fun. Let me know how it goes. Puzzled over the unknown hieroglyphics and heard the ominous syllables which can be rendered only as Cthulhu, and all this in so stirring and horrible a connection that it is small wonder he pursued young Wilcox with queries and demands for data. The earlier experiences had come in 1908, 17 years before, when the American Archaeological Society held its annual meeting in St. Louis. Professor Angell, as befitted one of his authority and attainments, had had a prominent part in all the deliberations, and was one of the first to be approached by the several outsiders who took advantage of the convocation to offer questions for correct answering and problems for expert solution. The chief of the outsiders, and in a short time the focus of interest for the entire meeting, was a commonplace looking middle aged man who had traveled all the way from New Orleans for certain special information unobtainable from any local source. His name was John Raymond Legrasse, and he was by profession an inspector of police. With him, he bore the subject of his visit, a grotesque, repulsive, and apparently very ancient stone statue whose origin he was at a loss to determine. It must not be fancied that Inspector Legrasse. Thank you for lurking. Fancy that Inspector Legrasse had the least interest in archaeology. On the contrary, his wish for enlightenment was prompted by purely professional considerations. The statute, idol, fetish, or whatever it was, had been captured some months before the wooded swamps south of New Orleans during a raid on a supposed voodoo meeting. And so singular and hideous were the rites connected with it, that the police would not but realize that they had stumbled upon a dark cult totally unknown to them, and infinitely more diabolic than even the blackest of the African voodoo circles. Of its origin, apart from the erratic and unbelievable tales extorted from the captured members, absolutely nothing was to be discovered. Hence the anxiety of the police for any antiquarian lore which might help them to place the frightful symbol, and through it track down the cult to its fountainhead. Inspector Legrasse was scarcely prepared for the sensation which his offering created. One sight of the thing had been enough to throw the assembled men of science into a state of tense excitement, and they lost no time to throw the assembled into a state of tense excitement, and they lost no time in crowding around him to gaze at the diminutive figure whose utter strangeness and air of genuinely abysmal antiquity hinted so potently at unopened and archaic vistas. No recognized school of sculpture had animated this terrible object, yet centuries and even thousands of years seemed recorded in its dim and greenish surface of unplaceable stone. The figure, which was finally passed slowly from man to man for close and careful study, was between 7 and 8 inches in height, and of exquisitely artistic workmanship. It represented a monster of vaguely arthropoid outline, and with an octopus-like head whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on hind and forefeet, and long, narrow wings behind. This thing, which seems instinct with a fearsome and unnatural malignancy, was of somewhat bloated corpulence, and squatted evilly on a rectangular block or pedestal covered with undecipherable characters. The tips of the wings touched the back edge of the block. The seat occupied the center, whilst the long curved claws of the doubled up crouching hind legs gripped the front edge and extended a quarter of the way down towards the bottom of the pedestal. The cephalopod head was bent forward, so that the ends of the facial feelers brushed the backs of huge forepaws, which clasped the croucher's elevated knees. The aspect of the whole was abnormally lifelike, and the more subtly fearful because its source was so totally unknown. Its vast, awesome, and incalculable age was unmistakable, yet not one link did it shew with any known type of art belonging to civilization's youth, or indeed to any other time. Totally separate and apart, its very material was a mystery. This soapy greenish black stone, with its golden or iridescent flecks and striations resembling nothing familiar to geology or mineralogy. The characters along the base were equally baffling, and no member present, despite a representation of half the world's expert learning in this field, could form the least notion of even their remotest linguistic kinship. They, like the subject and the material, belonged to something horribly remote and distinct from mankind as we know it, something frightfully suggestive of old and unhallowed cycles of life, in which our world and our conceptions have no part. And yet, as the members severally shook their heads and confessed defeat at the inspector's problem, there was one man in that gathering who suspected a touch of bizarre familiarity in the monstrous shape and writing. Hi, Pookie. And who presently told with some diffidence the odd trifle he knew. This person was the late William Channing Webb. I would agree. I think you need sleep. Go get some sleep. Good night. The person was the late William Channing Webb, professor of anthropology at Princeton University. In a tour of Greenland and Iceland in search of some runic inscriptions, which he failed to unearth. And whilst high up on the West Greenland coast, had encountered a singular tribe or cult of degenerate Esquimaux whose religion, a curious form of devil worship, chilled him with its deliberate bloodthirstiness and repulsiveness. It was a faith of which other Esquimaux knew little, and which they mentioned only with shudders, saying that it had come down horribly ancient eons before the world was made. Besides nameless rites and human sacrifices, there were certain blank hereditary rituals addressed to a supreme elder blank or Tornasock. And of this Professor Webb had taken careful phonetic copy of an aged Engakok or wizard priest, expressing the sounds in Roman letters as best he knew how. But just now, of prime significance was the fetish which this cult had cherished, and around which that had danced the aura leaped high over the ice cliffs. It was, the professor stated, a very crude bas relief of stone comprising a hideous picture and some cryptic writing. And so far he could tell, it was a rough parallel in all essential features of the bestial thing now lying before the meeting. This data, received with suspense and astonishment by the assembled members, proved doubly exciting to Inspector Legrasse, and he began at once to ply his informant with questions. Having noted and copied an oral ritual among the swamp cult worshippers his men had arrested, he besought the professor to remember as best he might the syllables taken down amongst the diabolist Esquimaux. Then there followed an exhaustive comparison of details and a moment of really odd silence, when both detective and scientist agreed with the virtual identity of the phrase common to hellish rituals, so many worlds of distance apart, what in substance, both the Esquimau wizards and Louisiana swamp priests had chanted to their kindred idols was something very like this. The word divisions being guessed at from the traditional breaks in the phrase as chanted aloud. I cannot even begin to say what this is. I apologize. It's like Be Naglu, Maglau, Naf, Cthulhu, Raleigh, Maga. Yeah, I tried. Legras had one point in advance of Professor Webb, for several among his mongrel prisoners had repeated to him what older celebrants had told them the words meant. What we summoning? You know, I would agree. It sounded like it. Okay. I think we're actually going to translate that. For several among his mongrel prisoners had repeated to him what older celebrants had told them the words meant. This text, as given, ran something like this. In the house of Riley, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. Something like that. Something like that. And now, in response to a general and urgent demand, Inspector Legras related as fully as possible his experience with the swamp worshippers. No sleep, only monster energy. Pookie, be careful. You better be careful. Don't make me come over there. And now, in response to a general and urgent demand, Inspector Legras related as fully as possible his experience with the swamp worshippers, telling a story to which I could see my uncle attach profound significance. It savored of the wildest dreams of Mythmaker and Theosophist? Ooh, I'm down. Just say when, Pookie. Now I lost my spot. It savored of the wildest dreams of Mythmaker and Theosophists, and disclosed an astonishing degree of cosmic imagination among such half-castes and pariahs as might be at least expected to possess it. Probably. On November 1st, 1907, there had come to the New Orleans police a frantic summons from the swamp and lagoon country to the south. The squatters there, most primitive but good-natured descendants of Lafitte's men, were in the grips of stark terror from an unknown thing which had stolen upon them in the night. It was voodoo, apparently, but voodoo of a more terrible sort than they had ever known. And some of their women and children had disappeared since the malevolent tum-tum had begun its incessant beating far within the back-haunted woods, where no dweller had ventured. Yo! Yo, Crow, thank you for the 200 biddies. You absolute legend, you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I really do appreciate that. There were insane shouts and harrowing screams, so chilling chants, and dancing devil flames. And the frightened messenger added, the people could stand it no more. So a body of 20 police, filing 2 carriages and an automobile, had set out in the late afternoon with the shivering squatter as a guide. At the end of the passable road, they alighted, and for miles splashed on in silence through the terrible cypress woods, where day never came. Ugly roots and malignant hanging nooses of Spanish moss beset them. Jeez, oh my goodness. Thank you. Extra 45 biddies, Crow. You sweetheart, thank you. It's really nice of you. It's really kind. My gosh, I appreciate that. Really do. So sweet. Always so sweet. And now and then a pile of dank stones or fragment of a rotting wall intensified by its hint of morbid habitation, a depression which every malformed tree and every funguous islet combined to create. At length the squatter settlement, a miserable huddle of huts, hove in sight, and hysterical dwellers ran out to cluster around the group of bobbing lanterns. The muffled beat of tom-toms was now faintly audible far, far ahead, and a curdling shriek came at infrequent intervals when the wind shifted. A reddish glare, too, seemed to filter through the pale undergrowth beyond the endless avenues of forest night. Reluctant even to be left alone, each one of the cowed squatters refused point blank to advance another inch towards the scene of unholy worship. So Inspector Legrasse and his 19 colleagues plunged on and unguided into black arcades of horror that none of them had ever trod before. The region now entered by the police was one of traditionally evil repute, substantially unknown and untraversed by white men. There were legends of hidden lake unglimpsed by mortal sight, in which dwelt a huge formless white polypus thing with luminous eyes, and squatters whispered that bat-winged devils flew up out of the caverns of inner earth to worship it at midnight. They said it had been there before d'Iberville, before LaSalle, before the blank, and before the wholesome beasts and birds of the woods. It was nightmare itself, and to see it was to die. But it made men dream, so they knew enough to keep him away. The present voodoo blank was indeed on the merest fringe of this abhorred area, but the location was bad enough, hence perhaps the very place of worship. The worship had terrified the squatters more than the shocking sounds and incidents. Only poetry or madness could do justice to the noises heard by Legrasse's men as they plowed on through the black morass toward the red glare and muffled tom-toms. There are vocal qualities peculiar to men, and vocal qualities peculiar to beasts. It is terrible to hear that one, when the source should yield the other. Animal fury and blank license here whipped themselves to demonic heights by howls and squawking blank that tore and reverberated through the night woods like pestilential tempests from the gulfs of hell. Now and then the less organized ululation would cease, and from what seemed a well-drilled chorus of hoarse voices would rise in sing-song chant that the hideous phrase of the ritual. And it's repeating in the house at Riley, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. The men, having reached a spot where the trees were thinner, came suddenly in sight of the spectacle itself. 4 of them reeled, 1 fainted, and 2 were shaken into a frantic cry, which made the cacophony of the blank fortunately deadened. The grass dashed a swamp water on the face of the fainting man and stood trembling, nearly hypnotized with horror. In a natural glade of the swamp stood a grassy island of perhaps an acre's extent, clear of trees and tolerably dry. On this now leaped a more indescribable horde of human abnormality than anybody Sime Orin and Gorola could paint. Void of clothing, this hybrid spawn were braying, bellowing, and writhing about a monstrous ring-shaped bonfire, in which the center of which, revealed by occasional rifts of the curtain of flame, stood a great granite monolith of some 8 feet in height, on top of which, incongruous with its diminutiveness, rested the noxious carven statue. From a wide circle of 10 scaffolds set up at regular intervals with the flame-girt monolith as a center hung, head downward, the oddly marred bodies of the helpless squatters who had disappeared. It was inside this circle that the ring of worshippers jumped and roared in the general direction of the mass motion being from left to right and endless bacchanal between the ring of bodies and the ring of fire. It may have been only imagination, and it may have been only echoes which induced one of the men, an excitable Spaniard, to fancy he heard antiphonal responses to the ritual from some far and unillumined spot deeper within the wood of ancient legendary and horror. This man, Joseph D. Galvez, I later met and questioned, and he proved distractingly imaginative. He indeed went so far as to hint the faint beating of great wings and of a glimpse of shining eyes and mountainous white bulk beyond the remotest trees. But I supposed he had been hearing too much native superstition. Actually, the horrified pause of the men was of comparatively brief duration. Duty came first, and although there must have been nearly 100 mongrel celebrants in the throng, the police rallied on their firearms and plunged determinedly into the nauseous rout. For 5 minutes, the resultant din and chaos were beyond description. Wild blows were struck, shots were fired, and escapes were made. But in the end, Legrasse was able to count some 47 sullen prisoners, whom he had forced to dress in haste and fall into line between 2 rows of policemen. 5 of the worshippers lay dead, and 2 severely wounded were carried away on improvised stretchers by their fellow prisoners. The image of the monolith, of course, was carefully removed and carried back by Legrasse. Examined at headquarters after a trip of intense strain and weariness, the prisoners all proved to be men of very slow, blank, and a mentally aberrant type. Most were seamen, and a sprinkling of blank and blank, largely blank or Brava Portuguese from the Cape Verde Islands, gave a coloring of voodooism to a heterogeneous cult. But before many questions were asked, it became manifest that something far deeper and older than blank was involved. Degraded and ignorant as they were, the creatures held with surprising consistency the central idea of their loathsome faith. They worshipped, so they said, the great old ones who lived ages before there were any men, and who came to the young world out of the sky. Those old ones gone now, inside the earth and under the sea, but their dead bodies had told their secrets and dreams to the first men, who formed a cult which had never died. This was the cult, and the prisoners said it always existed and always would exist, hidden in distant wastes and dark places all over the world, until the time when the great priest Cthulhu, from his dark horse, and the mighty cry of Raleigh under the waters, should rise and bring the earth again beneath his sway. Some day he would call, when the stars were ready, and the secret cult would always be waiting to liberate him. Meanwhile, no more must be told. There was a secret which even torture could not extract. Mankind was not absolutely alone among the conscious things of earth, for shapes came out of the dark to visit the faithful few, and these were not the great old ones. No man had ever seen the old ones. The carven idol was great Cthulhu, but none might say whether or not the others were precisely like him. No one could read the old writing now, but things were told by word of mouth. The chanted ritual was not the secret. That was never spoken aloud, only whispered. The chant meant only this. In the house at Raleigh, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. Only 2 of the prisoners were found sane enough to be hanged, and the rest were committed to various institutions. All denied a part in the ritual murders, and averred that the killing had been done by black-winged ones, which had come to them from their memorable meeting place in the haunted wood. But of those mysterious allies, no coherent account could ever be gained. What the police did extract came mainly from an immensely aged mestizo named Castro, who claimed to have sailed to strange ports and talked with undying leaders of the occult in the mountains of China. Pretty sure I pronounced that. Old Castor remembered bits of hideous legend that paled the speculations of theosophists and made man in the world seemed recent and transient indeed. There had been aeons when other things ruled the earth, and they had had great cities. Remains of them, he said, the deathless the deathless blank had told him. There were still to be found as cyclopean stones on islands in the Pacific. They all died vast epochs of time before men came. But there were arts which could revive them when the stars had come around again to their right positions in the cycle of eternity. They had indeed come themselves from the stars and brought their images with them. These great old ones, Castro continued, were not composed altogether of flesh and blood. They had shape, for did not this star-fashioned image prove it? But that the shape was not made of matter. When the stars were right, they could plunge from the world to world through the sky, but when the stars were wrong, they could not live. But although they no longer lived, they would never really die. They all lay in stone houses in their great city of Raleigh, preserved by the spells of mighty Cthulhu for a glorious resurrection when the stars and earth might once more be ready for them. But at the time, some force from outside must serve to liberate their bodies. The spells that preserved them intact likewise, preventing them from making initial move in the hey yo, Etiquette. Welcome on in. But at the time some force thank you for the follow. Ain't you sweet? Was to liberate their bodies. The spells that preserved them intact likewise prevented them from making an initial move, and they could only lie awake in the dark and think whilst uncounted millions of years rolled by. They knew all that was occurring in the universe, but their mode of speech was transmitted thought. Even now they talked in their tombs, when after infinities of chaos, the first men came. The great old ones spoke to the sensitive among them by molding their dreams, for only thus could their language reach the fleshly minds of mammals. Then, whispered Castro, those first men formed the cult around small idols with the great ones shewed them. Idols brought in dim areas from dark stars. That cult would never die till the stars came right again, and the sacred priests would take great Cthulhu from his tomb to revive his subjects and resume his rule of earth. This would be easy to know, for then mankind would have become as great as the old ones, free and wild and beyond good and evil, with laws and morals thrown aside, and all men shouting and killing and reveling in joy. Then the liberated ones would teach them new ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves, and all the earth would flame with a blank of blank and freedom. Meanwhile, the cult, by appropriate rites, must keep alive the memory of those ancient ways and shadow forth the prophecy of their return. In the elder time, chosen men had talked with the entombed old ones in dreams. But then something had happened. The great stone city, Raleigh, with its monoliths and sepulchres, and sunk beneath the waves, in the deep waters, full of the one primal mystery through which not even thought can pass, had cut off the spectral blank. But memory never died, and the high priest said the city would rise again when the stars were right. Hi, Iron Lion, good morning. Then came out of the earth the black spirits of the earth, moldy and shadowy, and full of dim rumors picked up in caverns beneath forgotten sea bottoms. But of them old Castro dared not speak as much. No, I think you would be fine. I really do. Okay, let's see. But of them old Castro dared not speak much. He cut himself off hurriedly, and no amount of persuasion or subtlety could elicit more in this direction. I would use my professional sexy voice. Hey, yo. Happy Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day to you as well. Okay. Hurriedly, and no amount of persuasion or subtlety could elicit more in this direction. This
Emotional damage.
the size of the old ones. I use that at work too. It fits. Okay. The size of the old ones, too, he curiously declined to mention. Of the cult, he said that he thought the center lay amid the pathless deserts of Arabia, or Iram, the city of pillars, dreams hidden and untouched. It was not allied to the European witch cult, which was virtually unknown beyond its members. Notebook had ever really hinted of it, though the deathless blank said that there were double meanings of the Necronomicon of the Mad blank Abdul blank, which the initiated read as they chose, especially the much discussed couplet. Hey, I gotta do it. I gotta do it. All right. That is not dead, which can eternal lie. And with strange aeons, even death may die. Legrasse, deeply impressed and not a little bewildered, had inquired in vain concerning the historic affiliations of the cult. Castro apparently had told the truth when he said that it was a holy secret. The authorities at Tulane University could shed no light upon either cult or image, and now the detective had come to the highest authorities in the country and met with no more than the Greenland tale of Professor Webb. The feverish interests aroused at the meeting by Legrasse's tale, elaborated as it was by the statute, is echoed in the subsequent correspondence of those who attended, although scant mentions occurs in the formal publications of the society. Caution is the first care of those accustomed to face occasional charlatanry, and imposture. Legrasse, for some time, lent the image to Professor Webb, but at the latter's death it was returned to him and remains in his possession, where I viewed it not long ago. It was truly a terrible thing and unmistakably akin to the dream sculpture of young Wilcox. That my uncle was excited by the tale of the sculptor, I did not wonder, for what thoughts must arise upon hearing, after a knowledge of what Legrasse has learned of the cult, of a sensitive young man who dreamed not only the figure of exact hieroglyphics of the swamp-found image and the Greenland devil tablet, but had come in his dreams upon at least 3 of the precise words of the formula uttered alike by Esquimau diabolists and mongrel Louisianans. Professor Engel's instant start on an investigation of the utmost thoroughness was eminently natural, though privately suspected young Wilcox having heard of the cult in some direct way, and of having invented a series of dreams to heighten and continue the mystery at my uncle's expense. The dream narratives and cuttings collected by the professor were, of course, strong corroboration, but the rationalism of my mind and the extravagance of the whole subject led me to adopt what I thought was the most sensible conclusions. So after thoroughly studying the manuscript again, and correlating the theosophical and anthropological notes of the cult narrative of Legrasse, I made a trip to Providence to see the sculptor and give him the rebuke I thought proper for so boldly imposing upon a learned and aged man. Wilcox still lived alone in the Fleur de Lis building in Thomas Street, a hideous Victorian imitation of 17th century Breton architecture, which flaunts its stuccoed font amidst the lovely colonial houses on the ancient hill, and under the very shadow of the finest Gorgon steeple in America. I found him at work in his rooms, and at once conceded from the specimens scattered about that his genius is indeed profound and authentic. He will, I believe, sometime be heard from as one of the great decadents, where he has crystallized in clay, and will one day mirror in marble those nightmares and fantasies which Arthur Machen evokes in prose and Clark Ashton Smith makes visible in verse and in painting. Dark, frail, and somewhat unkempt in aspect, he turned languidly at my knock and asked me my business without rising. When I told him who I was, he displayed some interest, for my uncle had excited his curiosity in probing his strange dreams, yet had never explained the reason for the study. I did not enlarge his knowledge in this regard, but sought with some subtlety to draw him out. In a short time, I became convinced of his absolute sincerity, for he spoke of the dreams in a manner none could mistake. They and their subconscious residuum had influenced his art profoundly, and he shewed me a morbid statue whose contours almost made me shake with the potency of its black suggestion. He could not recall having seen the original of this thing except in his own dreams. I'm not reading that. He could not recall having seen the original of this thing except in his own dream bas relief, but the outlines had formed themselves insensibly under his hands. It was, no doubt, the giant shape he had raved of in delirium, that he really knew nothing of the hidden cult, save from what my uncle's relentless catechism had let fall. He soon made clear, and I strove to think of some way in which he could possibly have received the weird impressions. He talked in his dreams in a strangely poetic fashion, making me see the terrible vividness, the damp cyclopean city of slimy green stone, whose geometry, he oddly said, was all wrong, and here with frightened expectancy, half mental calling from underground, Cthulhu, I can't pronounce that, but they repeat it twice. These words had formed part of the dread ritual which told of the dead Cthulhu's dreamed vigil in his stone vault at Raleigh, and I felt deeply moved despite my irrational beliefs. Wilcox, I was sure, had heard of the cult in some casual way, and had soon forgotten it amidst the mass of his equality, weird reading, and imagining. Later, by virtues of its sheer impressiveness, it had found subconscious expressions in dreams, in the bas relief and in the terrible statue I now beheld, so that his imposture upon my uncle had been a very innocent one. The youth was of a type at once slightly affected and slightly ill-mannered, which I could never like, but I was willing enough to admit both his genius and his honesty. I took leave of him amicably, and wished him all the success his talent promises. The matter of the cult still remained to fascinate me, and at times I had visions of personal fame from researches into its origins and connections. I visited New Orleans, talked with Legras and others of that old-time raiding party, saw the frightful image, and even questioned such the blank prisoners as still survived. Old Castro, unfortunately, had been dead for some years. What I now heard so graphically at first hand, though it was really no more than a detailed confirmation of what my uncle had written, excited me afresh, for I felt that I was on the track of a very real, very secret, and very ancient religion, whose discovery would make me an anthropologist of note. My attitude was still one of absolute materialism, as I wish it still were, and I discounted, with almost inexplicable perversity, the coincidence of the dream notes and odd cuttings collected by Professor Engel. One thing I began to suspect, and which I now fear I know, is that my uncle's death was far from natural. He fell on a narrow hill street leading up from the ancient waterfront swarming with foreign blank, after a careless push from a blank sailor. I did not forge the blank and marine pursuits of the cult members in Louisiana. It would not be surprised to learn the secret methods and prison needles as ruthless and as anciently known as the cryptic rites and beliefs. Legras and his men, it is true, have been let alone, but in Norway a certain seaman who saw things is dead. Might not the deeper inquiries of my uncle after encountering the sculpture's data have come to sinister ears? I think Professor Engel died because he knew too much, or because he was likely to learn too much. Whether I shall go as he did remains to be seen, for I have learned much now. And that was 2. That was kinda cool. How are we doing, guys? I would agree, Boot. I would agree. Doing well, I'm glad to hear. Overall, I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm This is a very interesting story, not at all what I was expecting, but I wasn't really expecting anything, to be fair. Um, I don't know. It's a weird one. I kind of like it, though. I like the weirdness of it. It's very original. Hi, Pookie. Ooh. Yeah, he's kind of unique. I fell asleep again. Oh, you see, you say that, Pookie, but we know you'll be back. Have a good sleep, though, regardless, okay? Playing Diablo 4 while you listen. Is surprisingly easy to zone out. Well, that's fair. It is. It's like, I don't know. It's it's just intriguing enough, I feel like. Plus, it's definitely up my street in terms of like the genre of books I typically read just on my own time. So yeah, no complaints here. All right. How are we looking otherwise? Okay. I think we're good. All right. Number 3, The Madness from the Sea. If heaven ever wishes to grant me a boon, it'll be a total effacing of the results of a mere chance which fixed my eye on a certain stray piece of shelf paper. It was nothing on which I would naturally have stumbled in the course of my daily round, for it was an old number of an Australian journal, the Sydney Bulletin for April 18th, 1925. It had escaped even the cutting bureau, which had at the time of its issuance been avidly collecting material for my uncle's research. Oh, no, I mean, dude, either way, like, I I've been told quite a few times that some people play my streams to fall asleep, and honestly, like, I struggle with insomnia, so by all means, like, I don't mind either way. I really don't. But I'm glad you enjoy listening to it, and I hope Diablo 4 is going well. Okay. I had largely given over my inquiries into what Professor Angel called the Cthulhu cult, and was visiting a learned friend in Paterson, New Jersey, the curator of a local museum and a mineralogist of note. Examining one day the reserved specimens roughly set on the storage shelves in a rear room of the museum, my eye was caught on an odd picture in one of the old papers spread beneath the stones. It was the Sydney Bulletin I have mentioned. My friend has wide affiliations in all conceivably foreign parts. The picture was a half-tone cut of a hideous stone image, almost identical with that which Legras had found in the swamp. Ooh. Eagerly clearing the sheets of its precious contents, I scanned the item in detail and was disappointed to find it only moderate length. What it suggested, however, was of portentous significance to my flagging quest, and I carefully tore it out for immediate action. It read as follows: Mystery derelict found at sea. Vigilant arrives with a helpless, armed New Zealand yacht in tow. One survivor and dead man found aboard. Tale of desperate battle and deaths at sea. Rescued seaman refuses. Particulars of strange experience. Odd idol found in his possession. Inquiry to follow. The Morrison Co's freighter Vigilant, bound from Valparaiso arrived this morning at its wharf in Darling Harbor, having in tow the battered and disabled but heavily armed steam yacht Alert of Dunedin, New Zealand, which was sighted April 12th in south latitude 34 degrees, 21 west, longitude 152 degrees, 17 degrees. I'm sorry, I'm not really that great with that. I hope that's okay. With one living and one dead man aboard. The Vigilant left Valparaiso March 25th and on April 2nd was driven considerably south on her course by exceptionally heavy storms and monster waves. On April 12th, the derelict was sighted and, though apparently deserted, was found upon boarding to contain one survivor in a half delirious condition and one man who evidently been dead for more than a week. The living man was clutching a horrible stone idol of unknown origin, about a foot in height, regarding whose nature authorities at Sydney University, the Royal Society, and the museum in College Street all profess complete bafflement, and which the survivor says he found in the cabin of the yacht, in a small carved shrine of common pattern. This man, after recovering his senses, told an exceedingly strange story of piracy and slaughter. He is Gustaf Johansen, a Norwegian of some intelligence, and had been second mate of the two-masted schooner Emma of Auckland, which sailed for Callao February 20th with a complement of 11 men. The Emma, he says, was delayed and thrown wildly south of her course by the great storm of March 1st and March 22nd, in south latitude 49 degrees by 51, west longitude 128 by 34, encountered the Alert manned by a blank and evil-looking crew of Kanakas and half-castes. Hey, being ordered prematurely to turn back, Captain Collins refused, whereupon the strange crew began to fire savagely and without warning on the schooner with a peculiarly heavy battery of brass cannon forming part of the yacht's equipment. The Emma's men shoot fight, says the survivor, and though the schooner began to sink from shots beneath the waterline, they managed to heave alongside their enemy and board her, grappling with the savage crew and on the yacht's deck and being forced to kill them all, the number being slightly superior because of their particularly abhorrent and desperate, though rather clumsy, mode of fighting. 3 of the Emma's men, including Captain Collins and First Mate Green, were killed, and the remaining 8 under Second Mate Johansen proceeded to navigate the captured yacht, going ahead in their direction to see if any reason for their ordering back had existed. The next day, it appears, they raised and landed on a small island, although none is known to exist in the part of the ocean, and 6 of the men somehow died ashore, though Johansen is blank reticent about this part of his history, and speaks only of their falling into a rock chasm. Later, it seems he and one companion boarded the yacht and tried to manage her, but were beaten out by the storm of April 2nd. From that time till his rescue on the 12th, the man remembers little, and he does not even recall William Bryden, his companion, died. Bryden's death reveals no apparent cause, and was probably due to excitement or exposure. Cable advises from Dunedin reported that the Alert was well known. Bryden's death reveals no apparent cause and was probably due to excitement or exposure. Cable advices from Dunedin report that the Alert was well known there as an island trader and bore an evil reputation along the waterfront. It was owned by a curious group of half-castes who frequently meetings and night trips to the woods attracted no little curiosity, and it had set sail in a great haste just after the storm and earth tremors of March 1st. Our Auckland correspondent gives Emma and her crew an excellent reputation, and Johansen is described as a sober and worthy man. The Admiralty will institute an inquiry on the whole matter beginning tomorrow, at which every effort will be made to induce Johansen to speak more freely than he has done hitherto. This was all, together with a picture of the hellish image, but what a train of ideas it started in my mind. Here were new hitherto? Oh, hitherto. Hitherto. Thank you, McAwful. See, to, as in the verb. Oh, okay. Hitherto. As, as it's done hitherto. 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 Oh, okay. Thank you. This was all, together with a picture of the hellish image, but what a train of ideas it started in my mind. Here were new treasures of data on the Cthulhu cult and evidence that it had strange interests at sea as well as on land. What motive prompted the hybrid crew to order back the Emma as they sailed about their hideous idol? What was the unknown island on which 6 of the Emma's crew had died, and about which the mate Johansen was so secretive? What had the Vice Admiralty's Admiralty's investigation brought out, and what was known of the noxious cult in Dunedin? And most marvelous of all, what deep and more than natural linkage of dates was this which gave a malign and now undeniable significance to the various turn of events so carefully noted by my uncle. March 1st, our February 28th, according to the international dateline, the earthquake and storm had come. From Dunedin, the Alert and her noisome crew had darted eagerly forth as if imperiously summoned. On the other side of the earth, poets and artists had begun to dream of a strange, dank, cyclopean city, whilst a young sculptor had molded in his sleep the form of the dreaded Cthulhu. March 23rd, the crew of the Emma landed on an unknown island and left 6 men dead. And on that date, the dreams of sensitive men assumed a heightened vividness and darkened with dread of a giant monster's malign pursuit. Whilst an architect had gone mad. That's not a verb. My bad. Yeah, I got what I meant. Thank you, though, McAwful. Okay, and finding my spot again. Okay. All right. Vividness and darkness with dread of a giant monster's malign pursuit, whilst an architect had gone mad and a sculptor had lapsed suddenly into delirium. And what of the storm of April 2nd, the date which all dreams of the dank city ceased, and Wilcox emerged unharmed from the bondage of strange fever? What of all this, and of those hints of old Castro about the sunken starborn old ones and their coming reign, their faithful cult and their mastery of dreams? Was I tottering on the brink of cosmic horrors beyond man's powers to bear? If so, they must be horrors of the mind alone, for in some way the 2nd of April had put a stop to whatever monstrous menace had begun its siege of mankind's soul. That evening, after a day hurried, babbling and arranging, I bade my host adieu and took a train for San Francisco. In less than a month I was in Dunedin, where, however, I found that little was known of the strange cult members who had lingered in the old sea taverns. Water scum was far too common for special mention, though there was a vague talk about one inland trip these mongrels had made, during which faint drumming and red flame were noted on the distant hills. In Auckland, I learned that Johansen had returned with yellow hair turned white after a perfunctory and non-inclusive questioning in Sydney, and had thereafter sold his cottage in West Street and sailed with his wife to his old home in Oslo. Of his stirring experience, he would tell his friends no more than he had told Admiralty officials. That's your city? Oh, cool. It's always cool to like make connections with whatever I'm reading to people's actual experience. That's really cool, McAwful. Okay. Of his stirring experience, he would tell his friends no. Oh, I'll wait. I was just saying it's cool to relate something I'm reading to your experience and where you live. It's cool. I'm I don't know, I think it's an awesome connection to make. Okay. Let's see. Of a stirring experience, he would tell his friends no more than he had told the Admiralty officials, and all they could do was to give me his Oslo address. After that, I went to Sydney and talked profitlessly with seamen and members of the Vice Admiralty Court. I saw the Alert, now sold and in commercial use, at Circular Quay in Sydney Cove, but gained nothing from its non-committal bulk. The crouching image, with its cuttlefish head, dragon body, scaly wings, and hieroglyphed pedestal, was preserved at the museum at Hyde Park, and I studied it long and well, finding it a thing of faithfully exquisite workmanship. And with the same utter mystery, terrible antiquity, and an unearthly strangeness of material which I had noted in Legras's smaller specimen, geologists, the curator told me, had found a monstrous puzzle, for they vowed that the world held no rock like it. Then I thought, with a shudder, of what old Oslo had told Legras about the primal great ones. They had come from the stars and had brought their images with them. Shaken with such a mental revolution as I had ever known before, I now resolved to visit mate Johansen in Oslo. Sailing for London, I re-embarked at once for the Norwegian capital, and one autumn day landed at the trim wharves in the shadow of the Edgeburg. Johansen's address, I discovered, lay in the old town of King Harold Hadrada, which kept alive the name of Oslo during all the centuries that the greater city masqueraded as Christiana. I made the brief trip by taxicab and knocked with pale. Really? Oh, that's so awesome. Okay, I really do try. Okay, I made a brief trip I made, I made the brief trip by taxicab and knocked with the palpant heart. Okay, trivia that nobody asked for. It means, oh, ooh, duly noted. And knocked with a palpitant heart at the door of a neat and ancient building with plastered front. A sad-faced woman in black answered my summons, and I was stung with disappointment when she told me in halting English that Gustav Johansen was no more. Bit of a dick. Oh, well, it's unfortunate. I'm so sorry. It's very unfortunate. I'm not sure what else to say to that, to be honest. Sounds like it was some time ago. So hopefully Oslo was able to move forward. He had not survived his return, said his wife, for the doings at sea in 1925 had broken him. He had told her no more than he had told the public, but had left a long manuscript of technical matters. Oh, so a pretty big minute then, huh? Okay, let's see, where'd it go? Of technical matters, as he said, written in English, evidently in order to safeguard her from the peril of casual perusal. During a walk through a narrow lane near Gothenburg dock, a bundle of papers falling from an attic window had knocked him down. Two Lascar sailors at once helped him to his feet, but before the ambulance could reach him, he was dead. Physicians found no adequate cause for the end and laid it to heart trouble and a weakened constitution. I now felt gnawing at my vitals that dark terror which will never leave me till I, too, am at rest, accidentally or otherwise. Persuading the widow that my connection with her husband's technical matters was sufficient to entitle me to his manuscript, I bore the document away and began to read it on the London boat. It was a simple rambling thing, a naive sailor's effort at a post facto diary, and strove to recall day by day that last awful voyage. I cannot attempt to transcribe it verbatim in all its cloudiness and redundance, but I will tell its just enough to shew why the sound of the water against the vessel's sides became so unbearable to me that I stopped my ears with cotton. Johansen, thank God, did not know quite all, even though he saw the city and the thing, but I shall never sleep calmly again when I think of the horrors that lurk ceaselessly behind life in time and in space, and of those unhallowed blasphemies from elder stars which dream beneath the sea, known and favored by a nightmare cult ready and eager to loose them on the world. Whenever another earthquake shall heave their monstrosity stone city again to the sun and the air. Johansen's voyage had begun just as he told it to the Vice Admiralty, the Emma in Ballast, had cleared Auckland on February 20th, and had felt the full force of the earthquake-born tempest, which must have heaved up from the sea bottom of the horrors that filled men's dreams. Once more under control, the ship was making good progress when held up by alert on March 22nd, and I could feel the mate's regret as he wrote of her bombardment and seeking. Of the swarthy cult friends on the alert, he speaks with significant horror. There was some peculiarly abominable quality about them which made their destruction seem almost a duty, and Johansen shews ingenuous wonder the charge of ruthlessness brought against his party during the proceedings of the Court of Inquiry. Then, driven ahead by curiosity in their captured yacht, under Johansen's command, the men in sight a stone pillar sticking out of the sea, and in south latitude 47 degrees by 9, west longitude 126 degrees by 43, came upon a coastline of mingled mud, ooze, and weedy cyclopean masonry, which can be nothing less than the tangible substance of Earth's supreme terror, the nightmare corpse city of R'lyeh, that was built in measureless eons behind history by the vast, loathsome shapes that seeped down from the dark stars. There lay great Cthulhu and his hordes, hidden in green, slimy vaults, and sending out at last, after cycles incalculable, the thoughts that spread far to the dreams of the sensitive and called imperiously to the faithful to come on a pilgrimage of liberation and restoration. All this Johansen did not expect, but God knows he soon saw enough. I suppose that only a single mountaintop, the hideous monolith-crowned citadel whereon great Cthulhu was buried, actually emerged from the waters. And when I think of the extent of all that may be brooding down there, I almost wish to kill myself forthwith. Johansen and his men were awed by the cosmic majesty of this dripping Babylon of elder daemons, and must have guessed without guidance that it was nothing of this or any sane planet. Awe at the unbelievable size of the greenish stone blocks, at the dizzying height of the great cavern monolith, and at the stupefying identity of the colossal statues and bas reliefs with the blank image found in the shrine on the alert, is poignantly visible in every line of the mate's frightened description. Without knowing what futurism is like, Johansen achieved something very close to it when he spoke of this city, for instead of describing any definite structure or building, he dwells only on broad impressions of vast angles and stone surfaces too great to belong to anything right or proper for this earth, and imbued with horrible images and hieroglyphs. I mention his talk about angles because it suggests something Wilcox had told me of his awful dreams. He had said the geometry of the dream place he saw was abnormal, non-Euclidean, and loathsome, redolent of spheres and dimensions apart from ours. Now an unlettered seaman felt the same thing whilst gazing at the terrible city. Johansen and his men landed at a sloping mud bank on this monstrous acropolis, and clambered up slipperily up over the tightened oozy blocks, which could have been no mortal staircase. The very sun of heaven seemed distorted when viewed through the polarizing miasma welling out from their sea-soaked perversion. And twisted menace and suspense lurked leering in those crazy elusive angles of carven rock, where a second glance showed concavity after the first strewn convexivity. Something very like fright had come over all the explorers before anything more definite than rock and ooze and weed had seen. Each would have fled had he not feared the scorn of the others, and it was only half-heartedly that they searched vainly as it proved for some portable souvenir to bear away. It was Rodriguez, the blank, who climbed up the foot of the monolith and shouted what he had found. The rest followed him and looked curiously at the immense carved door with the now familiar squid dragon bas relief. It was Johansen said, like a great barn door, and they all felt it was a door because of the ornate lintel threshold and jabs around it, though they could not decide whether it lay flat like a trapdoor or slantwise like an outside cellar door. As Wilcox would have said, the geometry of the place was all wrong. One could not be sure that the sea and the ground were horizontal, hence the relative position of everything else seemed phantasmally variable. Britton pushed at the stone in several places without result. Then Donovan felt over it delicately around the edge, pressing each point separately as he went. He climbed interminably along the grotesque stone molding. That is, one would call it climbing if the thing was not, after all, horizontal. And the men wondered how any door in the universe could be so vast. Then very softly and slowly, the acre-great panel began to give inward at the top, and they saw it. They saw it was balanced. Donovan slid or somehow propelled himself down or along the jamb, and rejoined his fellows, and every one watched the blank recession of the monstrosity carven portal. In this fantasy of prismatic distortion, it moved anomalously in a diagonal way, so that all the rules of the matter and perspective seemed upset. The aperture was black, without darkness almost material. The tenebrousness was indeed a positive quality, for it obscured such parts of the inner walls as ought to have been revealed, and actually burst forth like smoke in its 9 long imprisonment, visibly darkening the sun as it slunk away into the shrunken ambiguous sky on flapping membranous wings. The odor arising from the newly opened depths was intolerable, and at length the quick-eared Hawkins thought he heard a nasty, slopping sound down there. Everyone listened, and everyone was listening still when it lumbered slabberingly into sight, and groping squeezed its gelatinous green immensity through the black doorway into tainted outside air of the poison city of madness. Poor Johansen's handwriting almost gave out when he wrote this. The 6 men who never reached the ship, who things too perished of pure fright in that accursed instant. The thing could not be described. There was no language for such abysms of shrieking and immemorable lunacy, such eldritch contradictions of all matter, force, and cosmic order. A mountain walked or stumbled. God, what wonder that across the earth a great architect went mad, and poor Wilcox raved with fever in the telepathic instant. The thing of the idols, the green, sticky spawn of the stars, had awaked to claim his own. The stars were right again, and what an age-old cult had failed to do by design, a band of innocent sailors had done by accident. After vegetilians of years, great Cthulhu was loose again, and ravening for delight. Oh boy. The 3 men were up by the flabby claws before anybody turned. God rest them, if there be any rest in the universe. There were Donovan, Guerra, and Angstrom. Parker slipped as the other 3 were plunging frenziedly over endless vistas of green-crusted rock to the boat, and Johansen swears he was swallowed up by an angle of masonry which shouldn't have been there, an angle which was acute but behaved as if it were obtuse. So only Bryden and Johansson reached the boat and pulled desperately for the alert as the mountainous monstrosity flopped down the slimy stones and hesitated, floundering at the edge of the water. Steam had not suffered to go down entirely, despite the departure of all hands for shore. It was the work of only a few moments of feverish rushing up and down between the wheels and engines to get the alert underway. Slowly, amidst the distorted horrors of that indescribable scene, she began to churn the lethal waters. Whilst on the masonry of that channel shore that was not of earth, the titan thing from the stars slavered and gibbered like Alephim cursing the fleeing ship of Odysseus. Then bolder than oh, no spoilers. Then bolder than the storied Cyclops, great Cthulhu slid gracefully into the water and began to pursue the vast wave-rising strokes of cosmic potency. Bryden looked back and went mad, laughing shrilly as he kept on laughing at intervals till death found him one night in the cabin, whilst Johansson was wandering deliriously. But Johansson... Oh, my bad. Knowing that the thing could surely overtake the alert until the steam was fully up, he solved on a desperate chance and, setting the engine for full speed, ran lightning-like on deck and reversed the wheel. There was a mighty eddying and foaming in the noisome brine as the steam mounted higher and higher, and the brave Norwegian drove his vessel head-on against the pursuing jelly, which rose above the unclean froth like the stern of a demon galleon. The awful squid head, with the writhing feelers, came nearly up to the bowsprit of the sturdy yacht, but Johansson drove on relentlessly. There was a bursting as of an exploding bladder, a slushy nastiness of a cloven sunfish, and a stench of 1,000 opened graves, and the sound that the chronicler would not put on paper. For an instant, the ship was befouled by an acrid and blinding green cloud, and then there was only a venomous, seething astern, where, God in heaven, the scattered plasticity of the nameless sky spawn was nebulously recombining in its hateful original form. Whilst its distance widened every second as the alert gained impetuous from its mounting steam. That was all. After that, Johansson only brooded over the idol in the cabin and attended to a few matters of food for himself and the laughing maniac by his side. He did not try to navigate after the first bold flight, and for the reaction had taken something out of his soul. Then came the storm of April 2nd and the gathering of the clouds about his consciousness. There is a sense of spectral whirling through the liquid gulfs of infinity, of dizzying rides through reveling universes on Comet's tail, and of hysterical plunges from the pit to the moon, and from the moon back again to the pit, and all livened by cachinating chorus of the distorted, hilarious elder gods and the green bat-winged mocking imps of Tartarus. Out of the dream came rescue, the vigilant, the vice admiralty court, the streets of Dundee, and the long voyage back home to the old house by the Edgeburg. He could not tell. They would think him mad. He wouldn't write of what he knew before death came, but his wife must not guess. Death would be a boon if only it could blot out the memories. That was the document I read, and now I placed it in the tin box beside the bas relief and the papers of Professor Angell. Good morning, Wheel. With it shall go this record of mine, this test of my own sanity, where it is pieced together that which I hope may never be pieced together again. I have looked upon all the universe as to hold of horror, and even the skies spring, the flowers of summer, must ever afterwards be poison to me. But I do not think my life will be long, as my uncle went, as poor Johansson went. So I shall go. Good morning, Day. Well, sorry, morning, because I know someone doesn't like the word good in front of morning. Okay. I know too much, and the cult still lives. Cthulhu still lives too, I suppose. Again, in that chasm of stone, which has shielded him since the sun was young. His accursed city is sunken once more, for the vigilance sailed over the spot after the April storm, but his minsters on earth still below and prance and slay around idle idle kept monoliths in lonely places. He must have been trapped by the sinking whilst within his black abyss, or else the world would by now be screaming with fright and frenzy. Who knows the end? What has risen may sink, and what has sunk may rise. Loathsomeness waits and dreams in the deep, and decay spreads over the tottering cities of men. A time will come, but I must not and cannot think. Let me pray that, if I do not survive this manuscript, my executors may put caution before audacity and see that it meets no other eye. What? That was so cool. Oh my goodness. Oh, that was fun. That was actually, wow. I'm impressed. I'm impressed by the story, but I can definitely see the caution needed with it. My god, the amount of blanks. By chance, McAwful, did you catch how many blanks I used in that? That was absolutely incredible, though. And there was a lot of them. You know what? The point of the story still, we still got to the point. So at this point, like, I'm fine with it, you know? Oh, man. That was fun, though. That was a lot of fun. Let's see. Where are we at? Uh, what should I do now? I enjoyed it. Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Do you have any recommendations for what to read next? I think I might make this like an every Saturday morning type of thing. I'm really enjoying it lately. I have the entire collection of HP Lovecraft. So, by all means, should still have it. You mentioned what was it? The well, again, Rats in the Wall. Okay. Third Coherent Story. Oh, okay. Well, hold up, Doom. Well, thank you. Library clap. I appreciate that. Thank you for the 100 biddies. So sweet. Look at you. I hope you enjoyed the story as well, at least for what you heard. And I really do genuinely appreciate you being here, McAwful, especially someone who's familiar with the story. Is is good. Is good. Is 40K leagues in public domain? That is a great question for Google. I'm actually not sure. If it is, I will well, those can be a bit morbid, so I don't know about reading that per se. But you know, you would think, right? So typically, from what my understanding, if the book is like 70 to 75 plus years old, or the author has passed, I believe it becomes public domain at that point, is from my understanding. Is also basically true. But there was, or one thing, what it is basically just a single word. Okay. Is it morbid? At least to my knowledge. I don't remember it being pleasant, though, from my understanding. At least the majority. Wait, 40K League. Are you talking about like Warhammer? Or my hold up. We're gonna we're gonna research this here. I was gonna say, if that's the case, I do have plans for what I want to read in February. Oh. Now, oh man. Okay. I know it's not Mormon. Okay, sorry. I was thinking Warhammer. Surprise, surprise. That is a great question, actually. Definitely not public domain is my worst. Yeah, so I figured as much. I'm sorry, that's what I thought you originally meant. When I see 40K, it automatically goes straight to Warhammer. That's just where my mind's at. Okay. 20,000 league. It's 20,000 leagues, isn't it? 20,000. Yes, 20,000 leagues under the sea is public domain, so I could do that. It's heretics and space orcs on the brain. Always, day, always. But it looks like 20K leagues under the sea is um public domain, so I can do that one. Well, also, like, consider myself a heretic, so does that count? But also, apart from, Rats in the Wall, McAwful, is there any that you wanted to hear from Lovecraft? I know, I should always public domains. I would agree, I would agree. It's too bad, though, because there is definitely some books that I'm currently reading or that I'm a big fan of that I would love, 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 love to read on here. Oh, that's right, right. You mentioned that one. Good morning, LJ. How are you? It's one of the better. Ooh, definitely keeping that in mind. Okay. Is there any others that someone might be interested in? The only caveat is because of where I'm showing this, it has to be public domain, which is a pain in the ass. Not a fun way. Just saying. Okay. I know I want to read more Lovecraft because that's been widely requested. I want to read. Hi, LJ. Good morning. I know I want to read. Some people are going to be at me for this. I want to read, I think, Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice over February because I believe when I looked, that is public domain as well. Maybe. I'm like almost pretty sure it is. There you go. Um, okay. Yep. Nothing wrong with that. But otherwise, like I'm open to other suggestions in terms of like which books you guys would want to hear me read or whichever. I'm just really enjoying this, so I want to keep doing it for as long as I can. Although from what I remember, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is quite a long book, so I'm not too sure about that. Maybe hard to say. But yeah, let's see. Yep, that's a full one. No, I wouldn't even dream of trying to do that in a single stream. It would be like a multiple stream part. Absolutely. There's no other way. But we finished Dagon and the Call of Cthulhu. I think that's a pretty good stopping point. But you all want to chat a little bit? I don't see why not. I got some time. Finished my coffee. I'm good to go. What's up? I enjoyed it. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I will be uploading it to YouTube at some point if you guys wanna come back to it. Okay, if not, I don't know. No, I always like listening to audiobooks, so here's one way to do it. But I think actually, I just remembered I have something I need to do in 10 minutes, so with that said, I think I will call it at that, but I will be streaming again tomorrow morning, and I hope to see you guys then. You guys have a great day or night, or whatever time of day it is for you. See you guys later. Bye.